welcome to the Daring to Dad podcast. We're having conversations around fatherhood, masculinity, faith, and where these things intersect and impact the world around us. My name is Ryan. I'm a coach myself. I work with men and fathers, but I'm also just someone who's really interested in these topics and how they are impacting the world that we find ourselves in. I've had a number of incredible guests on the show having conversations on these topics. Today's guest is no exception, and I'm really excited to introduce Travis Streb. Travis is really the embodiment of what we talk about when we talk about like a coach. It's not just a job that we have, it's something that someone embodies with their whole lives. And I feel like Travis is such a great example of that. He is recently transitioned into executive coaching, helping leaders transform their approach to work and life. He works with Embodied leadership, a practice that realigns the mind, body, and nervous system to unlock true leadership potential. Travis's work has led to profound changes for executives and organizations alike. I love this conversation. It's practical, it's real, it's raw. Let's dive into it. Travis, thanks for carving out some time. I'm so glad you could join the Daring to Dad podcast, man.
Good to see you again. You know, it's been 3 years, and you got
it's been a while.
Nothing but dark hair and youth vibrating out of you.
I think my hair might be a little bit lighter than it was a couple of years ago.
Well, my wife cuts my hair, and she's finding all the spots that are thinning out. So.
Yeah, it looks good. For those who are just listening and can't see,
that's right.
Travis is looking good. I remember that because we met in, I think it was November 2019. This is specific because it was the year before the pandemic, but we met in the Pacific Northwest, a little island in the Puget Sound. And I remember coming back from that and shortly after that getting what they called walking pneumonia. And I remember this because, and this is probably not true for you because you live like in Canada, like you're
I live in the Northwest.
Yeah, you live in the Northwest. I froze my ass off, and I was cold to the bone up there. And I came back and got so sick. But I remember some of you guys up there were up in the morning, jumping into the water, and I was like, you guys are absolutely insane. So I remember that weekend for a lot of things, but that's one of the things I took away the most was just how cold I was and came back and got sick.
That's right, everybody. We were doing cold plunging before it was cool back in 2019.
Indeed, you were.
That was a very special weekend. I remember that. And I remember all the men that decided to come and join us for probably what is like the darkest, wettest weekend you could possibly imagine. Like, who plans an event in the middle of November in the Northwest?
Yes. You, Ryan, and Rainier did. This is what you did. So
that's right.
Man, it's so good to have you on here and connect with you. Just for people listening to get a little sense of who you are, maybe share a little about what you're up to in the world. I know you work a lot with men, with couples, but in your own words, share with us.
Yeah. So, you and I met under the same context, but the most of what I do is I'm working with either men or, humans in partnership, to help them have a deeper experience of living, a deeper connection with the earth, deeper connection with all the animate forces and spirituality, and to live lives as fully as they possibly can in relation with other humans and with the planet. And that takes shape in the form of programming I run for men, for couples, for folks who are in relationship transition, looking for their next partner, things like that. And I also run programs for my beloved teacher, a guy named John Wineland. I am the program lead for his teacher training program, which is all about relational intimacy and sexual polarity, which is a beautiful program. And then I also am the program lead with two other great men I know for the Embodied men's leadership training program for John as well. So my plate is fairly full with those things, but I somehow also have time to do some work in the corporate realm with a beautiful organization called Evolution, and we work with businesses to bring depth work and facilitation and coaching at times and I would say, uniquely um, strange and confronting and beautiful offsite experiences for people that are willing to go to the depths of what they need to become better leaders. So
Mm.
hope that that gives you a nice little rundown of where we're
It
at. I'm
does.
also, I mean, I think I'll just also share while we're on the topic. I'm also a father of two teenage girls. I've been married for 17 years, been with my partner for 20. And we just sent our oldest daughter off to college last week.
Wow.
We call it university up north in Canada, but y'all down south call it college. But she's not far away, but it still hurts my heart to walk by her bedroom in the morning and she's not there anymore.
Yeah, I was gonna say, what's that been like?
Um, it's been a combination of exuberance and sadness, just like mashed into one. I She was home for the weekend to celebrate my birthday this weekend, and we had such a great time. And she told me all about what she's doing, and she's just like her life is so beautiful and rich on campus. And then got caught up in the moment. We were having bubble tea, and then I took her to the seaplane terminal because she was flying back to the island where she goes to school, and I was just so sad to see her go. And we still have one at home, but it was just like, oh right, like home is somewhere else for the next 9 months. And she was texting us this week saying she might not come back for Thanksgiving, which is in October in Canada, by the way. Um,
Mm.
and
Yeah,
so yeah, man, it it hurts, but it's also I'm so happy for who she's becoming, and just really proud of who she is. And so that's probably parenting 101. There is, they're going to break your hearts and fill them all at the same time.
I love that. That's a great line. I've heard it said before that from the moment they're born, like they're walking away. They're moving away. And even my kids at 11 and 7, much younger than yours, I notice ways that they are beginning to separate and break apart and find their own way in the world. And as they do that, there's all sorts of things that bubble up for me, like, oh my gosh, like, did I do a good enough job? Are they gonna,
Yeah.
oh my gosh, are they gonna make mistakes? What happens if they're in this situation? Like, what goes through your mind when you think about all these things that she will encounter?
Well, I mean, there's a couple things. Like, first of all, the the undeniable truth that like I have installed my patterns into her.
Mm.
She'll come home and she'll be, telling me some story about someone, and she's judging them in the exact same way that I judge people. I'm like, oh no, like what have I created?
Yeah.
And then she's working so hard and studying and so diligent, which was also something that I hope she got from me. And so you kind of get to watch them live out the best and worst of you, which is beautiful, and then make their own art out
Mm.
of life, which I didn't really get until um, my older one was probably about 15, and my younger one's 14 now, so I'm seeing that a bit more. But it's so beautiful to see the despite you as a
Mm.
parent, and of course with your support, to watch them go and make art out of whatever it is they were handed. Um, and so I'm loving it, and then also realizing like she's not here anymore, and she'll be home in the summer, of course. And people are like, oh, don't worry, they'll be around till they're 30, and you'll want them gone. And everyone tells me these stories, and I'm like, I don't know. It's still tough. Um,
Mm.
and then there's something really beautiful just about even having daughters that I think is, I don't know if it's unique. I don't have a son. But I was with a group of men out in the high desert just a couple weeks ago near Bend, Oregon. And on the last day we were together, we were there for a few days. We have this ritual where we descend down into this river canyon. It's a little dangerous getting down. It's a little, we got to be really careful. And we treated the whole thing as if we were entering the great she, as it were. Like, what does it mean to be reverent as we walk into this valley and into this virtually untouched, pristine place that is all hers? And how do we do that in a way that honors and reveres her? And then I added a little piece at the end. We were about, I don't know, the last quarter mile. And I said, okay, well, every step you take, like, imagine you could do it with as much wonder, awe, care, and reverence as if you were entering, right? As if somebody were entering your daughter, like the great mother. And it was a huge turning point for a lot of men because they just hadn't thought about how they walk through the world and how they enter pristine, beautiful spaces. And, the chatter stopped. The footsteps got a lot more careful. The connection they had through their hearts into the land got a lot deeper. And so that's also, a beautiful piece about being a father to a daughter as well, is having to, confront the truth of that and see the beauty in it at the same time. So.
As I listen to some of the conversations happening, in the world right now when it comes to men and women and the way we interact and vice versa, it feels like there's a lot of things that are kind of pitting men and women against each other, whether it's like, social media, on, app dating, like all these kinds of things. And I think one of the things I hear, and probably even felt this myself bubble up, is fear, right? And having, and I have a daughter as well, and fear, even with my son, there's fear of putting them out there in the world and
Yeah.
what they're going to experience and the way they're going to be treated, right? What they're going to interact with. Um, I'm curious to know kind of maybe your perspective on that and what you've seen, just not only working with couples, but as a parent and the way that we're interacting, how we might be able to move not from a place of fear, because it feels like as parents, there's a lot of that out there.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, as a parent, regardless, I mean, I'm talking about gender because I happen to be, a father
Mm-hmm.
of two female identified humans, right? We can
Yeah.
call it that.
Right.
And I think in general, though, it's just scary to consider putting a child out into the world because the world, at least in my opinion, feels very disconnected despite massive connectivity. Um, Certainly, the people that I work with, both in and not in corporate spaces, are so overwhelmed with to-do lists, demands, with schedules, with news, with just this, like the fact that we have these devices that we're sort of staring at and taking in all this information in this huge stream. Um, it's scary to imagine putting someone out into the world and saying, "Here, go be successful," because there's just a real I don't think we're as conscious as we would like to be
Mm.
as humanity, regardless of how we identify. And then we start to add traditional or non-traditional gender roles into that, and it's even scarier. The accessibility we have to meet people that we might never have met in a beautiful way, and then also the accessibility and ease with which we can meet people that we shouldn't have met,
Mm.
is also
Mm-hmm.
scary to me, um,
Yeah.
as a parent, as a human, and the gender question still comes into play for me,
Mm-hmm.
right? And I don't have all the answers to it. That's for sure.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Right. I'm curious. I'm still thinking about the men walking into
Hmm.
that valley and taking those steps and um, beginning to see maybe with a new eyes, a new way. What are some things that you hear in on experiences like that, on walks like that from guys afterward? What are some of the barriers that men are experiencing right now in in opening up to these ways of seeing and being in the world? What do a lot of guys you work with come in with? Are there some common themes, or is it so diverse and individual?
Well, I mean, they are so diverse and individual, and
Mm-hmm.
I think we give them this great broad category of men, which is fine. It's what we kind of do, but the mosaic, if you will, or I mean, it's not a spectrum, like this beautiful mosaic where all these men come together. In my case, I'm not working with huge groups. I like small, kind of 10 to 15 size groups come together, and you build this mosaic, and they're so different, and yet most of them are searching for things they just haven't had the experience of. One is, it's a real buzzword right now, but I'll call it integration. And what I mean by that is integration, integrated, the mind and the body integration. Not very common. A lot of us are really plugged into our minds, which is fine. The mind's a beautiful tool, but the body is also a place of deep sensitivity and awareness. So there's integration there. There's integration into some kind of community fabric that most men just don't have. Um, that integration is missing. And so when they come together and have experiences of deep community, there's something very powerful. There's integration with um, the natural world, we could say, which I think is a strange term, but like with things like trees and plants and forests and
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
river
Mm-hmm.
valleys and mountains, and
Sure.
integration with that. There's integration with all the animate forces, so the things that we're not supposed to talk about because they're not real, like
Mm-hmm.
all of the forces that help shape this planet and help propel us forward. Um, is integration with God, integration with spirit, with whatever you call God.
Mm-hmm.
There's that, and so I think as men begin to have greater experiences of integration, they become more whole, and from that
Mm-hmm.
wholeness, they can make really powerful contributions to the world. But from a place of literal disintegration, it's much easier for them to disconnect from themselves, from their hearts, to be less sensitive, to be less aware, to be less reverent, and to be less available. And so then anything they produce is coming from a place of either just pattern from the past or some response to whatever they just saw on their phone,
Yeah.
to put
I'm
it
interested
frankly.
because I mean, you said like, it was interesting. I mean, you said it was a buzzword, but I haven't really had anybody on this podcast talk about or use that word. And I'm curious if maybe you could touch on maybe each one of these little things you went through with body, community, talking about nature, and spirit and spirituality. Maybe starting with like the body, and where does that disconnection come from? Do you think with guys?
Well, I think it's pretty common, just let's say in most of the Western world, and I dare I say it's not exclusive to men, but
Mm-hmm.
I don't work in spaces that are just female identified people, so I don't want to
Mm-hmm.
speak in that realm. But I work with a lot of couples and people looking for partnership. But it's the mostly it comes from the culture and the way we're brought up, right? Like there's not a lot of um, we don't have a lot of embodied community practices, um, that or spiritual practices anymore. Um, we've kind of stripped away most of what could have been embodied, in prior, let's say, prior cultures. So an example of that would be, um, let's say you go to church, right? and you go and you sit and you listen to someone talk at you
Mm-hmm.
for X number of minutes, right? Well, that's not the way it always was. And I know I'm speaking very broadly, and church is
Sure.
a,
No.
but
Yep. Mm-hmm.
we start to add some breath and some sound, like there's singing, or even like think about gospel.
Yeah.
Well, now we're really embodying, like we can get into our bodies and not just kind of singing the words on the page, but our whole body can sing, whether it's
Yes.
the words of the Lord or whether it's a Sanskrit chant in a Vedic culture, whatever it is, like we can get into our bodies and we can be in them and our minds are active and sometimes they let go completely. Now we have an
Mm-hmm.
embodied experience of spirituality.
Mm-hmm.
So that's just one element of it. Another one is this, like think about this podcast, right? We're sitting on a podcast right now. You
Right.
and I are talking to each other. There's a lot of words coming out. Now, of course, there's big moments of higher intensity and lower intensity in the podcast, but suffice it to say, we're just exchanging ideas. The people that are listening to this could grab some ideas they're getting and they could adopt that as knowledge and go, great, I have a knowledge base. I learned something from Ryan or from Travis, or I learned something just in hearing what they were talking about.
Mm-hmm.
That doesn't become embodied until someone does something with it repeatedly over days and weeks and years. And I think one of the things we over celebrate right now in our culture are the knowledge based practices rather than the embodiment of them. It's
Mm-hmm.
kind of like reading a book about sailing and thinking that you could go out and be a sailor. Like you would
Yep.
never think that, but we'll often do that with all kinds of things. Look, I read a book about leadership, or I read a book about parenting, and it's like until your body comes in contact with the thing, it's not
Yeah.
yours.
Right.
Yeah.
That is so true. I've especially in like a very heavy social media culture. It's like you can follow all the stuff about like parenting, like men's work, and like listen to all the podcasts. And I've been in seasons of life like this where I'm absorbing all these things that are good things, right? There's wonderful quotes and sayings and phrases, but I'm like, how come I'm not? There's this longing, and why isn't my life experience like producing the kind of results that I that these things are talking about? And that's because of the disconnection you're talking about. It's
Yeah.
like I'm lacking integration. How do I integrate these things into my actual actions? That's so
Yeah.
important.
Well, even right now, I'm sitting across from you, talking to you, and most of me is like, man, I wish we were in the same room right now.
Yeah.
Like, a big part of me was like, I wish we could have hugged to start the podcast. I wish that we could, be in contact. Like, I could actually pick up the rhythm of your breath. Like, there's all kinds
Mm-hmm.
of, and that would, and I love that we get to do this. I'm not saying that the culture is wrong. It's
Mm-hmm.
more just that we tend to over celebrate the knowledge and sort of mind-based activities, even mindfulness meditation, right?
Mm-hmm.
Over things that occur through the body. That I think is it's only one piece of the integration that we talked about. But I think it gives you access to many of the other ones. Like I love for people to come in contact with community.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
rather than like, oh, I go to the gym with people at my community center, but my AirPods are in, I don't know anybody, yeah, I wipe down my equipment after I use it, but that's about the extent of my community involvement, right? Or like,
Yeah. Right.
rather than like, are you coming in contact with the people in your community? This
Mm-hmm.
is it embodied, or do you just kind of know them through the Facebook group?
Right. Yeah,
So,
talk about that was the other integration you were talking about is community, which
mhm,
I mean you hear time and time again from so many guys, all the research, all the stuff is talking about, male the lack of community and male isolation and how it's this thing. Um I guess it's a broad question, but like what's up with that? Like what's your you work with a lot of guys, what do you observe?
well, I'll take it back to the culture, and then we'll talk about the
Yeah.
on the ground. But look at what we celebrate. Like we celebrate individual achievement
Mm,
all the time.
yeah.
Like even on
So true.
even
Right.
in the arts and athletics and other realms, we celebrate individuals on teams or like oh the like the conductor of the orchestra. Like
Right.
we
Hmm.
celebrate individuals and we talk
Hmm.
about individuals. And so no surprise that people are wired to for individual achievement, shall we say. And the myth of the lone wolf and we have movies that are about single, like one man fights off the army, or like survivor stories where it's one person.
Right.
And first of all, we strip out the animate. Like how did that one person, like how did Will or did Tom Hanks survive on that island?
Hmm.
Right. Well, he it wasn't just the volleyball. He came in
Right.
contact with the natural world, and that's really what kept him alive, right?
Yeah.
But so we celebrate individual, and so it's no surprise that men in particular, but it's really I think it cuts across gender. We're like, how do I become a superhuman? We also have this whole culture around self improvement, which you and I are part of, right?
Yeah. Hmm.
And so we come in contact with people, and I've been victim of this before, where it's like, oh, I'm going to become a superhuman. I'm going to optimize me
Yeah.
for
Right.
what, right?
Yeah.
If it's and so the community piece gets stripped out, and you're like, look how amazing I am. Like I get out every morning and I do my Huberman Labs podcast routine, and
Right.
I get in the
Yeah.
cold
Yeah.
water, and
Yeah.
I do my meditation, for 5 minutes, and great. I'm not saying you shouldn't be healthy, but most of it's in service of self optimization rather
Hmm.
than how can I be of service to the greater community, the humans, the non humans, the animate,
Hmm.
be in relation with God or whatever it is you call God,
Hmm.
and live through that. And I think that's harder for people to do because that's not the message we're getting from the culture. So when I come across men, most of them have done most of the hacking. They're like, "Oh, I've done all the biohackings, and I've been to done ayahuasca ceremonies and whatever else." Great, like those are nothing wrong with those. But where's the community that you bring it back to integrate into?
Yeah.
And that's
Mm.
what I see that not just men but humans are wanting. Um, and I think that they're not just wanting it, but they're like craving, yearning for it. It's very deep yearning.
Yeah. In the recent years, I've been like navigating the world as a single man, and that for I think maybe for the first time in my life, like truly, right? Like I got married super young, and here I am in my 40s trying to like make my way in the world now as a single man and out there, and it's hard like to make friends, right? It's a lot of people like in the neighborhood and everywhere like are married and have groups, and trying to find in and like and get into like the lives of other men is really, it feels like I didn't think it would be this tricky,
Yeah.
and I'm like, oh, like I know how to communicate, and I know like how to like open up conversations, and I have like training in this area. And then sometimes just like, oh my gosh, like why this feels really hard to find these spaces in real life, because you're like there's a plethora of them that you could join in like these different communities, but to your point, like these in-person things on a like in like my neighborhood city, people that would be around on a regular basis. And that's that I have found personally that struggle is real. And I don't think until I found myself in this place that I truly understood some of these complexities that you're talking about and the individualistic nature of our culture.
Yeah. Well, I think that's a really, like, your story is fairly common, and it was
Mm-hmm.
also mine. I went out and just created it.
Mm-hmm.
But one of the things I do think that just people, but I do think men's groups are incredibly important,
Yeah.
is it needs a ritual space to gather in,
Yeah.
right? For me, the best space for that is local. Like,
Mm.
who are the men in your community? Now, it's not always possible to, you're like, yeah, but I went to this thing in the desert or in the mountains, and I had all these great men,
Hmm.
and so, I'll just put in a little plug for what I'm up to, but that's something that I'm very much interested in creating or helping men create. So I have a non-local community, and we gather 3 times a year. But the mission is not to just become some rogue tribe and we like get all of our needs met through this group. It's so that each of them can go out and build something in their local community that replicates what they want to see more of in the world.
Mm.
And so a men's group, I mean, I've been running one for years out in Vancouver here where I live,
Hmm.
and it's like pulling teeth. I've been at this is year 2025 will be year 6, I think.
Mm.
And you should see, like, I've got like 60 something guys that could show up, and inevitably you get 10 to 15.
Yeah.
And inevitably, I know that the day of, there'll be the usual 5, 6, 7 guys will throw a message in the thread like, oh, sorry, bro, like, can't make it tonight or whatever. And of course, man, like, things come up. But
Sure.
we are not willing to prioritize being in community, mostly because I think of what you talk about, which is like, either I'm in too much pain, like my life is too painful right now, I couldn't possibly come into community, which is the best time, by the way,
Mm.
or a great time, shall we say, or everything's fine. Why would
Yeah.
I come? Why would
Why
I
would
go
I
to
need
men's
this?
group tonight?
Sure.
Like, why would I come and commune with men, forgetting that, like, it's not just about receiving, right?
Right.
So
Yeah.
I think you're pointing to something that is very necessary, and it's not normal, I don't think, for people not to gather, and in most cultures, for men not to gather, and women as well, to not have these ritual gatherings where there's a space to gather, and it doesn't need to be, deep shadow work every time you meet, but like to get together and do more than just talk about football or hockey or whatever your sport happens to be, or the news, but to get into the depths of you. And I think that those spaces are lacking, and I'd like to really see them created by the people in the community.
Yeah. I left work in the church a number of years ago, but I grew up in church, and most people go to church at one point or another. We're part of like small groups, and after I left the church, I was doing a lot of rethinking about what it is that I believed about the world, who or what was God, what spirituality, what all these things were, and being in my like mid late 20s, also had a lot of ideals about the world, and was really frustrated with the church and all the politics and the social economic stuff, and I was really angry for a long time. And so I like anything that had to do with like church, spirituality, religion, like I just like you know kept a long distance away from me. At this point in my life, I look back and I'm just like, shit, man. Like, those were the like incredible days of like community in spaces that you were talking about. This thing kind of brought us together. And even though there were issues with those, and like as there are with like any group,
Any
it's
spiritual
something that
community.
yeah, any
Yeah.
like I look back on that now and I'm like, you know what? That really instilled in me a longing for that type of space, and it did it really, really well, for better or for worse. And I think that there's something really, really beautiful about that. That I would not say this, 10 years ago when I was in the throes of kind of walking away from religion. But I think that spiritual community was a big, big thing for me.
Yeah, well, and that to me is a really key ingredient to any kind of ritualistic community group. And by
Mm-hmm.
ritual, just, for the listener, I don't mean like sacrificing goats. I just,
Yeah.
some
Yeah.
ritual. Maybe
Sure.
you gather around a fire. Maybe
Mm-hmm.
you have an
Yeah.
altar. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so
Yeah.
so, but maybe it's sacrificing goats. I don't know. It depends what your
Yeah.
thing is. But
Whatever your thing is. Yeah.
whatever your thing is. But I agree with you. Like the having a spiritual foundation, even if it's kind of syncretic, like there's a bunch of different deities or different gods involved, like having some spiritual foundation and a tether is so important. Otherwise, it starts to again just kind of become a group about creating individual superhumans,
Yeah.
or what do I get, rather than how does this group serve life in some way? How does us meeting beyond us, how does it serve life, serve love, serve God, if that's a word that resonates for you? And I
Mm-hmm.
think that starts to give a lot of meaning. And I agree with you that you got to be careful, because then you start to get like, oh, but it's a spiritual community and there's going to be gurus, and it's like, well, there's ways to build community that doesn't have a guru at the center of it, and there's ways to build connection where manipulation and coercion are not part of it, and there's all kinds of ways to do it. But I also
Right.
understand why the culture is a bit trepidatious about that, just because of the overreaches, not just by church, right?
Yeah.
But many organized spiritual groups have had the same
Yeah.
challenges.
Always felt like the strongest communities that I was a part of were like the community was a byproduct of like being a part of like this thing, like on this mission. Like there was a goal in mind, there was some sort of like thing we were after trying to achieve, there was a project we were a part of, like something that we were on a mission to do, and the community was a byproduct of that versus like the goal simply alone being the community. Is that kind of, would you find that that's true of your experience?
Yeah, I mean, I think it helps to have something to galvanize the group around, but I think meaning and purpose don't necessarily need to be um, like a concrete mission, like we'll conquer this thing or accomplish this thing, but more like, um, why do we exist?
Mm-hmm.
What is it that we're trying to create more of in the world?
Mm-hmm.
And if you can align on those things, I think you could have a very powerful experience in
Right.
community,
Mm-hmm.
and also have ways to welcome people in so it doesn't become too isolated. Like,
Mm-hmm.
there's a whole bunch of ways to create community, but I just think that there's huge value in non-local community, and
Mm-hmm.
and at the same time, people want to have somewhere where they call home, that they can come home to and really, you know, I think be together in person, ideally, see the whites of each other's eyes, breathe together, be together, speak,
Yeah.
pick up the subtle vibrations of the voice. All those things matter in community. And I don't know if we're quite wired for fully virtual, non-local community. I think we need some element of it. Otherwise, things feel like there's a lack or a yearning for it if it doesn't get met.
There really is.
Yeah,
I think for me, as I get older too, I just, and maybe it's just the age I'm at, the generation I'm a part of, man. I don't know, but when I look at all the technology, all the brilliant, like, life changing technology that's out there, so much of it is good, but so much of it, like, to be honest, scares me. Like when I'm looking at things, I'm like, is this real? Is this video real? Is this person real, or is it like AI generated? Like, I don't even know what to like believe or trust anymore. But it creates this actual like trust with like people and truth and with what is real. And I find myself, well, how do you get around that? Here, I know how to get around it. Let's get in the same room where I can see
yeah,
you, where all the things you're talking about, I can feel you, see you, you feel your vibrations, all those kinds of things. It's a way that I think can restore a sense of trust with one another, and I think trust is big with guys especially.
Yeah, the trust element's huge. I think as you said that, I was also going down the path of, and it's nice to have a personal practice
Mm-hmm.
that can take you somewhere, that
Mm.
can take you out of the vortex of the phone,
Yeah.
which is kind of like access to everything going on in the world,
Mm-hmm.
and some things not going on in the world that look like they're going on in the world all at once.
Sure.
And that could very much be an individual practice, but that gets us back to integration of the self and finding wholeness.
Mm-hmm.
And I think people have for thousands of years had ritual practices where they connect with themselves and with the divine, or whatever you call divine, through the body,
Can you give
through
some
the body.
examples of like what that might be?
Certain types of yoga,
Mm-hmm.
um, certain types of we call it breath work now, but there's like ways to breathe. There's ritual around having a candle, or different chanting. There's like, and you could, again, there are many cultures that are saying, hey, please don't practice our stuff, but there's also a bunch of others that are saying, hey, this is all for the taking. But
Mm.
it doesn't only look like sitting still meditating,
Right.
which I think is the common view of how to integrate your body and mind. And I certainly, the men that I work with, I have not come across anybody who out of the gates can just sit still with their mind for half an hour. Like, in fact,
Yeah.
I don't even think it's a good idea, because the
Mm.
mind is mostly the byproduct of a culture that is like so overwhelmed that the mind is overwhelmed. And so I like to work with breath and different kinds of movement and yoga, elements of qigong, or even elements of kundalini yoga. There's so many different forms, and to have that become a practice where you can regain both the ironically gain integration and
Mm.
some
Yeah.
sovereignty over your own mind and body, because
Mm-hmm.
it's not as sovereign as we think, given how much input is coming in. And if we slow the input down, or we alter the input, um, imagine if you just woke up in the morning and lit a candle and, I don't know, chanted for 5 minutes.
Yeah.
People are freaking out already on the podcast, but if you do that rather than get up in the morning and then look at a combination of the worst thing happening in the world to children, and
right.
then
Right out the
you know
gate,
a
you're just like,
meme about
yeah.
kittens, and then some dating advice, and that's your morning. I mean, lighting a candle and chanting doesn't seem so weird anymore. um, so those are the
Yeah.
kinds of things
Yeah.
that I'm interested in introducing into the world, and then also having people find very deep connection with themselves, but also with each other.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Yeah.
and I think, and there's an appetite for it. People keep
Yeah.
coming and saying, "Hey, can we do more of this?" So
Mm-hmm.
I'm guessing it's valuable. Yeah.
You talked about this, and I've chatted with others about this idea as well. I know for me, my favorite places are the places that help me like and help my mind to quiet, right? Because again, I'm doing stuff. I'm online. I have a full time job in marketing. I'm doing this kind of stuff, and I get a lot of input. Right, I'll see a lot of stuff just into my mind all day. I got kids and mortgage, all these things that so many people worry about. Like you said, our minds are full. We're overwhelmed, and the places where it quiets down are like such a gift. And one of those places for me is nature, like getting out and just and walking and breathing and moving is
Yeah.
such a gift, and it's such an incredible thing. And I am not an outdoorsman. Like I want to just be clear. Like I am not like these are
Yeah.
this is like, hey, where can I go that's like 20 minutes, 30 minutes from my house where I can get out and I can walk. Even like I live close to the American River here in Sacramento, and walking along the river. It doesn't have to be anything crazy. I'm not talking about, I'd love to do more intense stuff, but simple things like that have been huge for me. You talked about nature.
Yeah, I mean, again, I think you and I both are very blessed to be living where we're living, and not everyone has
Mm-hmm.
access to that. But there's almost always access to like a skyscape, like even just
Mm-hmm.
the sky, or maybe a park.
Mm-hmm.
For those that have more available, the the time it takes to get immersed in the natural world, nature, I mean the world,
Right. Yeah.
is not that. It doesn't take that much time.
Yeah.
A few minutes, either walking, I would say slowly,
Mm-hmm.
um, but walking intentionally, or sitting in a place that is surrounded by life forms that are not human and not plugged into the internet
Mm-hmm.
is so powerful. What I where I think I may differ with some is like, it's not just about you and your nervous system,
Mm. Yeah.
which
Say
is the
more.
common
Yeah.
thing. It's about you as a human connecting with all of the animate and inanimate, or all the animate forces that are out in the forest or in the ocean or in the sky or wherever you happen to be in the desert. And it's it's not that nature is there to serve you,
Mm-hmm.
right? It's that you're in
Yeah.
relation with
Mm.
it. And so for me, it's the same as gathering with a group of people, where you're going and saying, hey, like we're all part of this great wholeness, this great oneness. Why don't we spend some time together? Because, by the way, like, where do you think the American River started? And, the
Mm-hmm.
snow that fell in the mountains in Northern California, right? Like, all of being connected, not just through thought, but by also feeling the forces, like feeling how the river valley that you walk in Sacramento, is entirely different energetically and spiritually than the river valley I might walk through on the Tsleil-Waututh territory here in North Vancouver. Like, it's just so different.
Yeah.
And being in relation with that, and not just with like the tree, the dirt, the rock, but also the animacy of all of it. Like,
Mm.
that is a practice I think that is worth doing,
Yeah.
and taking us out of the center of it also takes the pressure off, because so much of the culture is also about, I'm here in this human body as a man and I'm going to figure it out, and like, all the weight of the world is on my shoulders,
Mm-hmm.
rather than
Yeah.
like, I'm part of this incredible community of beings and forces and other humans, and I'm just a part of it. It's not on me to kind of fix the problems of the world. It's on me to be in relation with the world in a positive way.
Yeah. That's a powerful meditation, like what you just said about not looking at it as like this is here for me, and it's about what I can get from this space. And when I really tap into like what I'm experiencing when I am outdoors, when I am just walking, is somewhat getting lost and becoming just a part of this movement.
Mm-hmm.
And it does that release, like, oh my gosh, I don't feel the weight of everything, which we carry so much of.
Yeah,
That's powerful. That's
Integ-
a good meditation. Yeah.
integration. It's
Yeah.
integration, and
Yeah.
I'm for those, it's integration with all that is around us, and
Hmm.
it's you talked about the river, so I was reminded, we talked about walking down into this canyon,
Hmm.
in the high desert. At a certain point, every single one of the men there got into this river, and that feeling you were talking about of merging,
Mm.
right? It happened, right? We didn't
Yeah.
need to talk about it or say go merge with the river. It was just like enjoy this beautiful, you know, this beautiful river valley for as long as we have here. And inevitably people just started to merge. So
Mm.
I think that you're right. You're not thinking about it. You're not trying to get something. You're just being with. And I think that's something that again is incredibly powerful. So yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
I want to just kind of coming in just to the end here.
yeah. Of course.
This is a we've talked a lot about this, but I'm always really interested, and I think what you do really well is to get really practical about where men, because this is daring to dad, so we're talking to a lot of male identified people and people who have kids. Um, we talk a lot about different, there's a lot of big words out there, and we talk about meditation, integration, all these things. But I'm wondering, there's a lot of guys out here just like, I don't know how else to describe them. Just like these everyday guys are out there trying to make their way in the
Yeah.
world, love their kids, go to work, get home, love their partners, and do some good in the world. And sometimes these things can feel very far out there, right? They can feel very a lot of ideas, but like where can a guy start? I'm saying, hey, he's feeling some pull in his life. He's feeling some this disintegration, disconnection, but looks around and says, "Oh my gosh, I'm not really connected to a men's group or a church or spiritual community. Where can a
Yeah.
guy begin?"
Well, I think you pointed to the first place, which is like, hey, like where do I feel a bit disintegrated? And we talked about some areas like body, mind. We talked about the community versus the lone wolf, right?
Mm-hmm.
And and I think it would be to start to do a bit of an inventory for yourself. It would probably take about 8 minutes to just sit down and go, where do I feel a bit disintegrated? And maybe you have a good group of friends, but it just isn't quite what you'd like it to be.
Mm-hmm.
Like it doesn't have the depth you're looking for or the place to really share, like, hey, I'm struggling with this. My strong opinion on this would be to go and create the very thing you're looking for. Go create the integration you're looking for. And that to me would look like grab one guy who you're like, hey, would you be down with like just hanging out, maybe not drinking tonight or not doing the norm, whatever the norm is, watching the game and just chatting about a few things. I got a couple of things I want to get off my chest. I don't need you to solve anything, but could you listen to me? See where that goes, right? Maybe next time you invite another guy. That's one place to start.
Yeah.
Another place to start would be to do what you do, which is like, don't make it a big deal. Don't take 5 hours and go on like a whole day hike, but like carve out 15 minutes and get out somewhere that's particularly beautiful for you. Maybe it's your backyard. Maybe it's down by the American River. Maybe it's in Duluth, Minnesota, wherever it is.
Sure.
Find somewhere beautiful and spend time reintegrating with all that is around you. And last but not least, like find some time to integrate the body and the mind that's working so hard. And I have a library with some really quick practices on it. If you want to link it, Ryan, there's probably a million other ones out there too, but there's just a lot of quick ways to do that don't require that you spend 90 minutes and put on Lululemon pants and go to a yoga class. Like you can do these things in your work clothes. So I'm a real dude as well, and I had like the guys that are in my men's group all lead rich, complicated, interesting lives. And they have children, partners, jobs. Some of them run their own businesses. Like some of them are CEOs. Some of them are just scraping by. Like, and so, and all of them are looking for the same things, but they're choosing to carve out time for the thing that's important, which is the integration.
Yeah. I think that's what you say is really important is choosing to do it and lean into it.
Yeah.
Choosing to actually step out and do something about this this thing that you know is happening, within yourself, and taking off some of the distractions, the thing you used to ignore it, numb out, and lean into what that could really be. So important,
Yeah.
man. Thank you so much, man. I really appreciate you and just the wisdom and experience, and I think the gravity that you bring to these topics. So, really grateful. And just include, where can people find you? Because as I'm listening, I imagine people saying, "Hey, this is stuff I'd like to get connected to in some way." Where you at?
I have a very limited social media presence, but I'm on Instagram.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
post things from time to time. I have a practice library on YouTube, some talks, some things like that. And I'm also have a website, which is my first name, Travis, last name, Streb.com. We'll link it up for you.
yeah,
Um, and you know, I run programs from time to time, and I'd love to have anyone that wants to come and join, to see
yeah.
what it's like to experience the things I'm talking about.
Mm-hmm.
Because you can listen to me talk about them, but please come and try them out. Or if you
Yeah,
can't come do what I'm doing, find someone who's doing something similar and get out
yeah,
and do it, because it will be a catalyst for you.
yeah. I agree,
Yeah.
man. Thank you so much for joining us.
It's been a pleasure, man. I always remember the podcast you were on with me,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
I'm just so happy to hear that you're thriving in your life. And I know it's a very different life than it was 3 years ago. And
yeah,
just happy for you. And I'm just so honored that you would bring me on to share me with your community. So thanks for making the time to bring me on and
yeah,
welcoming me so much.
yeah. Actually, the pleasure is mine, man. All right, we'll talk soon.
Thanks, Ryan.
Thanks, man.
Thank you. That was fun.
Yes, it was. Hey, thanks so much for watching, for listening. If you enjoyed it, one way you can support my work is by subscribing, by sharing, all of those things. Thanks so much. I'm incredibly grateful for your support.